It was supposed to be my chance, my one shot to get out of this town and do something bigger with my life. I'd worked my whole life, top grades, extra shifts at the local diner, anything to save up for college. I could almost taste it, the independence, the freedom to finally make choices for myself. But then dad got sick. Mom called me home from my last week at school, her voice shaky on the phone. She didn't need to say much. The exhaustion in her voice was enough. Dad's illness hit us all like a wrecking ball. And without much discussion, the decision was made. Mom looked at me with tear stained eyes and a plea hanging in the air. I was the oldest, the dependable one. So I did what I always did. I put my dreams on hold. I stayed. It was only supposed to be temporary, just until things settled down. But with dad in and out of hospitals, temporary turned into months, and then those months began stretching into years. I watched my friends go off to college, move to cities, start living lives that were supposed to look like mine. Instead, I was stuck juggling part time jobs to pay bills and help mom, who was barely holding herself together. And then there was Kyle, my younger brother, golden child, practically born with a free pass to do whatever he wanted. While I was running from job to job, Kyle was skipping school, throwing parties, and pushing every boundary without a second thought. But he was charming. People just fell over themselves to forgive him, especially mom and dad. Every time he got into trouble, they'd shrug it off, laughing about boys being boys. And as usual, it was me cleaning up his messes, covering for him when he got caught out late or when he lied about school. Kyle got to be free while I was shackled to responsibilities I didn't even choose. One night, just as I was collapsing onto my bed after a double shift, mom knocked on my door. She looked tired, her eyes heavy with worry, and asked if I could pick up some extra shifts because Kyle had been caught shoplifting and dad wasn't up to dealing with it. Shoplifting. It was a new low, even for Kyle, but instead of outrage, mom just looked disappointed. Nothing more. I wanted to scream, to tell her it wasn't my responsibility, that maybe it was time Kyle faced the consequences for once. But as always, I swallowed my words and agreed to help. My protests never got me far anyway. Months passed, and each time I thought about finally leaving, something new pulled me back. Dad's health got worse, bills piled up, and I was just so tired. It felt like the whole weight of the family rested on me, and any move I made to step away was pulling at a thread that would unravel the entire fabric. So I kept sacrificing my time, my money, my life. All the while, Cal drifted through life, barely lifting a finger to help. Mom would tell me, Cal just needs time to figure things out. And somehow, it was my job to buy him that time, even if it meant my own clock was running out. One evening, as I was finally sitting down after a 12-hour shift, I overheard mom and dad talking about how proud they were of Kyle for staying out of trouble lately. Staying out of trouble? The kid had been grounded 2 weeks ago for crashing a friend's car, and here they were acting like he was some kind of saint for managing not to ruin his life every other day. I clenched my jaw, swallowing the bitterness that had built up over the years. It was like everything he did was measured against a different scale, one where not actively screwing up counted as an achievement. But then, hope flickered on the horizon. After years of saving, of scrimping, and working late into the night, I finally had enough to start thinking about a future of my own. Maybe I couldn't go to college right away, but I could move out, get a place in the city, maybe take some night classes, and start living for myself. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Of course, that was when Kyle got himself in deeper trouble than I'd thought possible. I came home one night to find mom sobbing at the kitchen table, dad looking grave as he held a stack of bills. It didn't take long for me to piece together what happened. Kyle, brilliant as ever, had gotten into debt with some shady types. They were threatening to come after him, and they'd already started calling the house, demanding payment. My heart sank as mom looked up at me, pleading, Maya, you're the only one who can help. Kyle doesn't understand how serious this is. He's still so young. Yum? He was 22, for God's sake. The anger bubbled up, burning hot in my chest, but so did that old sense of duty. Because, of course, there was no one else they could turn to. I bit back my frustration, knowing that fighting wouldn't get me anywhere. I went to my room and stared at my bank statement. My hard earned savings, my ticket to freedom, was right there on the screen. But with each ring of the phone, each threatening message that left mom trembling, the choice felt less and less like a choice at all. In the end, I did what I had always done. I paid his debts, wiping out my savings in one humiliating click. Kyle barely even thanked me. He brushed it off, saying he'd pay me back someday, maybe when he hit it big. I swallowed my anger, feeling foolish for expecting anything else. Mom and dad were overjoyed, fawning over him for learning from his mistakes. It was like I was invisible, like the hours and years of sacrifice meant nothing in their eyes. With my savings gone, my plans collapsed. Once again, I was stuck, tethered to this family by a duty they would never understand or appreciate. I couldn't even look at Kyle without feeling the simmering resentment bubbling over. Every time he tossed his car keys onto the table or talked about some new scheme, I felt the walls close and tighter around me. The breaking point came a few weeks later, late one night. I was pulling another shift, trying to save up once more, when my phone buzzed. It was a friend from high school who still lived nearby, texting me a link to a social media post. My heart pounded as I opened it, finding a picture of Kyle and his friends in some fancy restaurant, flashing wads of cash and laughing like they hadn't a care in the world. He was using the money I'd given him, the money that was supposed to be my escape, to show off. My hands trembled with rage. I wanted to scream, to march into that restaurant and demand he pay me back, to tell mom and dad everything he was doing. But I already knew how that would end. They'd make excuses, say he was just having fun, or that he deserved a break. That was it. I was done. After that night, I made a decision. I was done living my life as the family scapegoat, as Kyle's backup plan, as everyone's crutch. I stopped taking mom's calls every time they started with Maya. Could you do one more thing for us? I started saving again, this time faster and more ruthlessly. I cut back on every expense, took extra shifts, and kept everything to myself. I didn't tell anyone, not even the few friends I had left in town, and certainly not my family. I was done letting them see my plans so they could tear them apart when it suited them. My silence must have shocked them. The usual flood of Maya, we need you, texts slowed to a trickle, then stopped altogether. Weeks turned into months, and I finally started feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. It was like I'd been holding my breath for years and had just remembered how to exhale. Even the resentment I felt toward Kyle and my parents dulled as I focused on the life I was building in secret. My bank account grew, inch by inch, toward the amount I'd need to finally leave this place for good. Then, just as I was starting to feel like I had a real future, the betrayal hit like a storm I never saw coming. I remember the day like it was burned into my memory. I was at work, mid shift, clearing tables, when a bank notification buzzed on my phone. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't checked my balance in a few days, and I was almost at my goal. But when I opened the notification, my stomach dropped. There was a massive withdrawal I hadn't authorized. Almost all my savings gone. I blinked, trying to make sense of the numbers, convinced there had to be a mistake. I double checked my account history, scrolling through the transactions with trembling fingers, and there it was, a series of withdrawals, all marked under my own name. I knew, without even questioning, who had done it. Kyle. It had to be him. He must have somehow gotten access to my account, using my savings for some scheme or bet or whatever reckless thrill he decided to chase. I felt my hands clench, my chest constricting with rage, betrayal, and disbelief. But I didn't cry. The anger was too thick, too sharp, choking out anything softer. I stormed home that night, ready to confront him, ready to finally blow up and say everything I'd held back all these years. When I arrived, the house was quiet, but mom and dad were waiting in the kitchen. Mom looked anxious, biting her lip, while dad avoided my gaze, staring hard at the kitchen table. My heart was pounding, my voice shaking as I demanded an explanation. He didn't mean to hurt you, Mom said, her voice weak, like she couldn't muster the strength to actually say what she knew was true. Didn't mean to hurt me? I almost shouted, my voice cracking with fury. He stole from me, Mom. All of it. Everything I saved to get out of here. Dad finally looked up, his expression pinched and weary. Kyle's going through a rough time, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He's in trouble, Maya. He made a mistake, but he'll make it right. You have to understand. Understand. That word scraped against me like a knife. All my life, I'd been expected to understand, to sacrifice, to forgive. But Kyle was somehow above all that. He was just having a rough time, making mistakes that somehow only I paid for. I turned to Mom, looking for some hint of remorse, some sign that she'd see reason. How can you let him get away with this? I asked, my voice barely holding back the hurt. Do you even care about what I've lost? Do you have any idea what I've given up for this family? Mom's gaze softened, almost pitying. Maya, you've always been the strong one, she said, as if that was supposed to make me feel better. Kyle, he's not like you. He needs help and family sticks together. You've done so much for him already. What's a little more? A little more. My whole life had been a little more for Kyle's sake. And now, as I stood there, looking at my parents, I realized they would never change. They would keep defending him, keep excusing him, as long as I kept bailing him out. They wouldn't listen. They didn't care. That was the moment I broke. Not outwardly, no. I held it together long enough to walk away, to leave the house in silence. But inside, something shattered. The last of my loyalty to my family, the last of my belief that maybe, someday, they'd see what they were doing, see what they'd cost me, it was gone. I was done with them. I packed my bags that night. I didn't have a plan, but I knew I couldn't stay under the same roof as them, couldn't live in the same town that had become a prison. I booked a cheap bus ticket to the nearest city and left before sunrise, leaving nothing behind except a hastily scrawled note saying, "Don't call me." I didn't care where I ended up as long as it was far away from them. In the city, I found work quickly, small jobs at first, then a position at a marketing firm where they valued hard work. I threw myself into my new life, building from scratch and embracing the exhaustion that came from working for myself, finally, instead of someone else. I made friends, people who didn't know about Kyle or my parents, people who saw me for who I was without any baggage. Slowly, bit by bit, I let go of the bitterness that had hardened in me over the years. For the first time in my life, I felt free. My savings account grew, and I saved with a new purpose, not to escape, but to build. I found a small apartment, decorated it with plants and soft lighting, filled it with books and memories that were mine alone. My past felt like a distant, ugly story I'd outgrown, something I could leave behind without looking back. Months turned into years, and my career flourished. Promotions came quickly, and soon I was managing a team, respected for my work ethic and skills. I'd even found someone special, a kind, thoughtful man named David who respected my independence, who made me feel valued for the first time in my life. With David, I could breathe easy, trusting that he'd never take from me what I wasn't willing to give. But just as I'd begun to feel safe in my new life, the past came crashing back in a single phone call. It was Mom. I didn't recognize the number at first, but when I answered and heard her voice, a cold dread settled in my stomach. She sounded frantic, her words tumbling over each other in a rush. Kyle was in trouble again. This time, he'd gone too far, lost everything. Their savings were drained, their home was at risk, and they needed my help. Her voice cracked with desperation as she begged, pleaded with me to come back, to help the family like I always had. As she spoke, memories flooded back. Years of sacrifice, of holding everything together while Kyle tore it apart. And here she was, once again, asking me to sacrifice my life, my hard-earned peace, for a family that had never done the same for me. I clenched the phone, my mind racing, torn between the familiar pull of duty and the fierce independence I'd fought so hard to build. I wanted to scream, to tell her no, to finally break free from this cycle of endless sacrifice. But then there was a pause, and in that silence, I realized something. I sat there, gripping the phone, feeling the weight of Mom's silence on the other end. Her voice, usually so firm and insistent, had cracked under the strain of desperation. Part of me felt a sick, hollow satisfaction at hearing her in this state, needing me, knowing that Kyle had finally burned through every last ounce of grace she'd been willing to give him. But mostly, I felt tired, so unbearably tired. "What do you want from me, Mom?" I asked, my voice calm, like the eye of a storm. "What am I supposed to do that I haven't already done 100 times?" She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I could hear all the things she wanted to say, but knew I wouldn't accept. She didn't ask me to come back home directly. Instead, she asked me to help find a solution, to help Kyle get back on his feet. I could practically feel her reaching through the phone, trying to pull me back into the role I'd played my whole life, the role of the fixer, the one who'd make everything okay. "Mom, I'm not coming back," I said, each word heavy, deliberate. "I've built my life here. I've moved on." "You don't mean that," she replied, a hint of disbelief coloring her words. "Your family, Maya. You've always been there for us, for Kyle. He just needs guidance. He needs you." "No, Mom," I said, firmer this time. "He needs to face the consequences of his choices. I've given enough, and I'm not going to be dragged back into this mess because of him." Silence again. Only this time it was harsher, colder. I could almost picture her standing there, stunned, not knowing how to respond. Mom wasn't used to hearing no from me. She wasn't used to seeing the strength she'd forced me to build for myself turned against her. "So, that's it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're just going to abandon us when we need you the most?" The guilt hit me like a slap, but I refused to let it show. They had manipulated me with guilt my entire life, and I was done being their puppet. I took a deep breath, studying myself. "No, Mom. You abandoned me a long time ago," I replied, feeling the weight of those words settle in the air. "You've always chosen Kyle. You've always made excuses for him. And now, finally, you're seeing the consequences of that." "You're being unfair," she said, her tone laced with disbelief. "I thought you were better than this. I thought you were stronger." That was it, the final jab to try and keep me in line. But I wasn't falling for it anymore. "Goodbye, Mom," I said, my voice steady, final. And then I hung up, feeling the last shred of connection between us unravel and dissolve. I sat there for a while, staring at the phone in my hand, half expecting her to call back. But the phone stayed silent. Days passed, and I threw myself into work, into my life, trying to block out the guilt and doubt gnawing at the edges of my resolve. It wasn't easy. Some days, the guilt would overwhelm me, creeping in like a shadow, whispering that maybe I should have done something. But I'd shake it off, reminding myself of everything I'd given, everything I'd sacrificed. I deserved to live my life without being held hostage by their endless needs and Kyle's bottomless greed. Then, a week later, I got another call. This time, it was from David, who had picked up my phone when I was in the kitchen making dinner. I heard him talking in low tones before he walked over, his face troubled. "It's your dad," he said, handing me the phone. I took it, feeling a wave of dread settle over me. My father's voice was weak, strained, as he explained that Kyle's behavior had spiraled further. He was facing legal trouble, something serious this time, and they were scrambling to keep him out of jail. Dad sounded exhausted, like he'd finally hit the end of his patience. But there was still that same expectation in his voice, the unspoken belief that I'd find a way to fix this. "Dad, I already told Mom I can't do this anymore," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady, despite the sympathy I felt creeping in for him. He sounded so frail, so desperate. "Kyle made his choices. He has to deal with the consequences." "I know," Dad whispered, his voice cracking. "But he's your brother, Maya. You don't just walk away from family." The weight of those words sat heavy on my chest. I'd been raised to believe that family was everything, that family was forever, no matter how much it hurt, no matter how much it took. But wasn't there a line? Wasn't there a point where the sacrifices became too much, where the cost was too high? "Maybe," I replied softly, "but sometimes family isn't enough." I hung up, feeling hollow, like something inside me had finally broken free. It hurt, but it was a clean kind of pain, a sharp release of all the resentment I'd carried for so long. I looked over at David, who had been watching me with a steady, reassuring gaze, and he wrapped his arms around me, holding me close. For once, I felt supported, felt like I didn't have to bear everything alone. Life went on, quieter, more peaceful. I didn't hear from my family again, and part of me was relieved, even as another part of me worried about what might be happening. But I knew that every time I even considered reaching out, it would only pull me back into that endless cycle, that web of manipulation and guilt that I'd fought so hard to escape. Months later, I received an email from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. She'd heard about everything that had happened, about Kyle's troubles, and she wanted to know if I'd be coming to help. She said the family was struggling, that things were bad, really bad. I read the email, feeling the familiar pang of responsibility stir within me, the old instincts urging me to jump in and save the day. But then I closed the email, deciding not to reply. I'd made my choice. This was my life now, and I wouldn't give it up for anyone, not even family. I had David, a career I loved, friends who truly cared about me. I had built something real, something mine, and I wasn't going to throw it away. And so I went on, embracing the peace I'd fought so hard to earn, even as I knew the past would always linger, just on the edge of my memory. I thought I was finally free. For months, I'd barely thought about Kyle, about my parents, or the life I'd left behind. I had moved on, or so I'd convinced myself. But as time went on, their absence left a strange, hollow space in me, like I'd cut out a piece of myself to escape their reach. I tried not to think about it, burying myself in work, planning trips with David, filling every corner of my life with new memories and new people. And yet, a tiny part of me was still tethered to them, no matter how much I tried to sever that tie. It wasn't until I heard from my old friend Leah that the weight of it all came crashing back. Leah had always been a close friend, one of the few people who knew the full extent of my family's hold over me. She'd been the one to push me to leave in the first place, to stop letting them take everything from me. We hadn't talked in a while, but when she called, her voice was filled with hesitation. Maya, I know you don't want to hear this, she began, but I think you should know things aren't going well back home. I froze. The phone clutched in my hand. What do you mean? It's Kyle, she said, her tone wary. He's in trouble, Maya. Big trouble. Your parents are trying to keep it quiet, but everyone knows. He's burned through all their money, and he's facing some serious charges. It's not just a slap on the wrist this time. They're saying he could end up in prison. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. Leah, I told them I was done. I can't go back to being their fix-it person. They chose him over me, again and again. They don't get to do that and then come crawling back when things fall apart. I get it, she replied gently. Believe me, I do. But I just thought, maybe you'd want to know. We said our goodbyes, but her words hummed heavy in the air long after I put down the phone. Kyle facing prison time. My parents on the verge of financial ruin. I could picture it all too clearly. The desperation, the blame, the same cycle of excuses and justification they'd always used to protect him. For years, they'd enabled him, fed his reckless behavior, and now they were finally paying the price. And a part of me was relieved. A part of me felt like they deserved this. But another part of me, the part that was still tethered to them, felt the familiar pull of responsibility, the nagging thought that maybe, just maybe, I should go back. Just to see what was happening. Just to make sure they were okay. I shook the thought from my mind, reminding myself of everything I'd been through, every sacrifice I'd made for a family that never appreciated it. I couldn't go back. I wouldn't. Days passed, and I tried to put it all out of my mind. But it was like a splinter lodged beneath my skin, a constant, irritating reminder that no matter how far I'd come, I was still haunted by the family I'd left behind. David noticed the change in me, the way I'd drift off in the middle of conversations, my mind 1,000 miles away. Do you want to talk about it? He asked one evening, his voice soft, patient. You've seemed distant lately. I hesitated, unsure how to explain it. It's my family, I finally admitted. the words coming out in a rush. They're in trouble, and part of me feels like I should be doing something. But the other part of me knows that I've already done enough, that I've given everything I had to them. I can't go back, David. I just can't. He took my hand, his touch grounding me. You don't owe them anything, Maya, he said firmly. You've given them more than enough. You deserve to live your own life. I nodded, grateful for his support, but the guilt gnawed at me, no matter how much I tried to bury it. It felt like an invisible chain, tugging me back toward a life I thought I'd escaped. I could tell myself that I was done with them, that I'd moved on, but deep down, a part of me still felt bound to them, still felt responsible. Weeks turned into months, and I carried that weight with me, unable to fully shake it. I tried to push through, to live my life as if nothing had changed, but the guilt was like a shadow, following me everywhere. Finally, I decided I needed some kind of closure. Maybe I didn't need to go back, but I could at least get some answers, some confirmation that I'd made the right choice. One evening, I sat down and composed a letter. It was addressed to my parents, but really it was more for myself, a way to put everything I was feeling into words, to finally let go of the resentment and the anger. I wrote about everything I'd sacrificed for them, every moment I'd given up, every dream I deferred. I told them how I'd felt invisible, how every time they'd chosen Kyle, a part of me had broken. And then I told them that I was done, that I was choosing myself for the first time in my life. I sealed the letter and sent it, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. The weeks that followed were quiet. I didn't hear back from them, and I wasn't sure if they'd even read the letter. But I felt lighter, as if some of the weight I'd been carrying had finally lifted. I focused on my work, on my relationship with David, on building a life that was truly mine. And slowly, I began to feel like I was healing. Then, one morning, a letter arrived. It was from my mother. My hands trembled as I opened it, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and curiosity. Her words were brief, almost clinical, as she acknowledged my letter, my decision to move on. She didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge the pain I'd laid bare. Instead, she wrote that Kyle was facing a court date and that they were struggling. She ended with a single sentence that cut deeper than any insult. I just hope you're happy now. I stared at the words, a cold numbness spreading through me. Happy. As if my happiness was some selfish indulgence, as if I'd somehow abandoned them out of spite. It was a final, bitter reminder that they would never see me as anything but a convenience, a resource to be tapped when needed and discarded when not. And yet, the letter brought me the closure I hadn't realized I needed. I'd spent so much of my life chasing their approval, hoping for some acknowledgement of my worth, of my sacrifices. But now I knew there would never be an apology, never be an admission of guilt. They would always see me as the one who turned her back on family, while Kyle remained the victim, the one they needed to save. For the first time, I felt truly free. I didn't need their validation anymore. I didn't need to keep fighting for scraps of love and acceptance they'd never give. I could walk away, for real this time, without looking back. It was a painful, final severing, but it was a clean break. And in that break, I found peace. I folded up the letter, tucking it away in a drawer, a symbol of the past I was leaving behind. I wasn't sure if I'd ever look at it again, but for now, it was a reminder of the strength it took to choose myself, to build a life beyond the grip of their expectations. And as I closed the drawer, I felt a strange, quiet resolve settle over me. I had made my choice, and for the first time in my life, I was choosing myself. The peace I felt after that final letter lingered like a quiet presence in my life. For months, I threw myself into work, into new projects, into the routines that grounded me in this new life I'd built. I didn't tell David about the letter from my mother. I didn't want to bring the past into our world, didn't want to let any of that bitterness bleed into the life we were creating together. But sometimes, in the stillness of the early mornings or in quiet moments before sleep, the words she'd written drifted back to me, a reminder that no matter how far I ran, the past would always linger. Then one evening, as I was getting home from work, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen, feeling my heart jump when I saw the unfamiliar number. I knew instinctively it was someone from back home. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let it fade into the quiet of my apartment, but something stopped me. I picked it up, bracing myself. Hello, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Maya. It was Leah. Her voice was thick with something I couldn't quite place. Maybe fear, maybe regret. I'm sorry to call you like this, but you need to know what's going on. I felt the muscles in my neck tense. What is it? She hesitated, and in that pause, my heart sank. Your parents, they're losing the house, Maya. Kyle's debts have swallowed up everything. They've already sold almost everything they could, but it's not enough. They're scrambling, and they're saying it's your fault. My fault. The words tasted bitter, absurd. How could it possibly be my fault, Leah? I gave them everything for years, and now, because I finally decided to stop, it's on me. I know, she said quickly. It's not fair. None of it is. But they're desperate, and they're looking for someone to blame. Kyle, he's made a mess of everything, and they're protecting him again, just like they always did. They think you're the one who abandoned them. The anger flared up, hot and unyielding. I could feel it boiling beneath my skin, all the resentment and bitterness that I'd kept locked away. They were still protecting him, still enabling him, even as he dragged them to ruin. And somehow, I was the one at fault. Why are you telling me this, Leah? I asked, my voice clipped, barely able to hold back the flood of emotions. What do you want me to do about it? I don't want anything from you, she said, sounding tired. I just thought you should know. They're talking about reaching out to you, asking for help again. I figured. I figured you'd want to be prepared. I closed my eyes, letting her words sink in. Part of me felt a sick satisfaction, knowing that their endless loyalty to Kyle had finally cost them everything. But another part of me, some old, deeply buried part, felt a pang of guilt. They were my family after all, and now they were facing the consequences of choices I had no control over. Thanks for letting me know, I said, my voice hollow. But I'm done, Leah. I've made my peace with them. After we hung up, I sat in silence, the weight of Leah's words pressing down on me. I thought about all the years I'd spent sacrificing for them, for a family that would never truly see me. I thought about Kyle, his reckless choices, his endless safety net of excuses. And I thought about my parents, who had spent years protecting him, even as they slowly, methodically destroyed my sense of worth. It all felt so small, so fragile now, like a distant memory I'd outgrown. But as much as I tried to push it away, I couldn't shake the image of them losing everything, of the home I'd grown up in disappearing because of the choices they'd made. A few days later, the inevitable happened. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. The words were clipped, pleading, devoid of the usual warmth she reserved only for Kyle. Maya, we're in trouble. Kyle's debts have caught up with us, and we're out of options. We need your help. Please come home. I stared at the message, my heart a conflicted mess of emotions. I could almost hear her voice, that tone of desperation that she'd used so many times before to pull me back into her orbit. For a moment, I felt the familiar pull, the urge to fix things, to shoulder the weight of their mess. But then I remembered everything I'd gone through to get here, the years I'd spent rebuilding my life, reclaiming my freedom. I took a deep breath and typed back a response. I'm sorry, Mom, but I can't help you this time. I've moved on. Her reply came almost instantly. Maya, you're being selfish. This is your family. We're losing everything, and you're just going to stand by and watch. I closed my eyes, feeling a pang of pain, but I didn't respond. For once, I let the silence settle between us, let it speak for me. I put the phone down, refusing to let her words cut me any deeper. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the guilt gnawing at me like a familiar ache. I'd done everything I could for them. I'd given them years of my life, my savings, my dreams. I had nothing left to give, and yet a part of me still felt that old sense of duty, the nagging feeling that maybe, just maybe, I should be doing more. But I pushed it away. I'd made my choice. and I had to live with it. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the texts from my mother faded. Each one was a plea, a desperate reminder of the life I'd left behind. But I ignored them, letting the silence grow between us, refusing to be drawn back into their web. Then one day, I received a final message from her. You'll regret this someday, Maya. When we're gone, and you're left with nothing but your selfish choices, you'll regret turning your back on us. I read it once, twice, feeling the sting of her words. But this time, something in me shifted. I realized that she was right. Someday, I might look back on this choice, on this severing of ties, and feel a sense of loss. But I was willing to live with that. I was willing to face whatever consequences came with choosing myself over the family that had taken everything from me. I put the phone down, a strange sense of peace settling over me. I had made my choice, and I was ready to live with it. The past would always be a part of me, but it didn't have to define me. I had my own life, my own happiness, and for the first time, I felt truly free. Months passed after that final message, and I carried on, each day a little easier, each breath a little lighter. For the first time, I felt like I was living my life on my terms, without the shadow of family obligations hanging over me. My world became simpler, centered on my career, my friendships, and the quiet life I was building with David. There were no more pleas from my mother, no more guilt ridden calls or texts. The silence from my family was strange, but it was also a relief. I no longer felt like I was walking on broken glass, trying to please people who would never see me for who I was. One afternoon, I was working on a new marketing pitch when an unexpected email landed in my inbox. It was from a lawyer back in my hometown, someone I didn't know, with the subject line, Estate of Gregory and Lydia Torres. My parents' names. I clicked on it, my heart sinking as I skimmed the first few lines. The email was formal, coldly professional. It was informing me that my parents had passed away in a car accident and that, as their only next of kin, I was the designated executor of their estate. For a few seconds, the words didn't register. My parents were dead. Just like that, without any warning, without any chance for closure. The news felt surreal, like a punch to the gut that I hadn't been prepared for. I sat there, staring at the screen, numb and cold. They were gone. I would never get another message from my mother, never hear her voice again, pleading, accusing, blaming. And I would never see my father's tired, resigned expression or hear his quiet acceptance of everything Kyle did. A strange mix of grief and guilt washed over me. We had been estranged for so long, the distance between us a deliberate choice, but now that choice felt irreversible, permanent. They had died without us ever making peace, without me ever hearing an apology for them, ever. Hearing me say that I forgave them, my hands trembled as I closed the laptop, feeling the weight of the finality pressing down on me. When I told David, he held me close, his arms steady and reassuring as I broke down. I hadn't thought I'd have tears left for them, but there they were, spilling over, raw and relentless. The years of anger, resentment, love, and loyalty all tangled together, unraveling in that one moment. I felt like a child again, mourning not just the parents I'd lost, but the parents I'd wanted them to be, the parents who could never quite love me the way I needed. A few weeks later, I found myself back in my hometown, standing in the house I'd grown up in. The lawyer had sent me the necessary paperwork, and I was here to settle their estate, to sell the house and close this final chapter of our lives. The house was a shell of what I remembered. The furniture was old and worn, the walls bare, stripped of the warmth and love I'd once felt here as a child. It was as if my parents had been fading along with everything they owned, holding on to memories they couldn't afford to let go of. As I walked through the rooms, memories surfaced, each one sharper than the last. I saw myself as a little girl, clinging to my father's hand as he carried me on his shoulders. I saw my mother, laughing in the kitchen, her face full of love before everything became complicated. I saw Kyle and me playing in the backyard, before the weight of favoritism and expectation had set in. The nostalgia was almost too much, filling me with an ache for something that had never been fully real. In their bedroom, I found a small box hidden at the back of the closet. Inside were letters, old photos, and cards we'd made for them as kids. There was one photo of me, taken on the day I graduated high school, the pride in my father's eyes unmistakable. I'd forgotten that moment, forgotten that for one brief period, I'd been their pride and joy. But time had worn that memory thin, just as it had worn thin their love, twisted by disappointment and Kyle's unending demands. I sifted through more papers, receipts, and bills until I came across a letter my mother had written but never sent. It was addressed to me. I unfolded it carefully, feeling a strange sense of anticipation. Maya, it began, I know you'll probably never read this, but I wanted to say it anyway. I know we weren't fair to you. I know we asked too much. I see now how much we hurt you, and it's one of my deepest regrets. Kyle, he was always our weakness, and in protecting him, we failed you. I hope that wherever you are, you find the happiness and peace we couldn't give you. I'm sorry. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. It was the apology I had given up hoping for, the acknowledgement of the pain I'd carried all these years. I sat on the floor, clutching the letter, sobbing for everything that had been lost, the family we could have been, the love they could have shown, the forgiveness that had come too late. When I finally rose, I felt lighter, as if the years of resentment had finally lifted, leaving something softer, something that felt like closure. I tucked the letter into my bag, a piece of my mother I could carry forward, a reminder that she had known, even if she never said it out loud. As I left the house for the last time, I felt a strange sense of freedom. I wasn't walking away out of anger or bitterness. I was walking away because I'd finally found peace. I'd done my duty, settled their affairs, and said my goodbyes. I could close the door on this chapter without regrets. Back in the city, life resumed, but something inside me had shifted. I felt clearer, more present, able to love without fear, without the weight of old wounds pulling me back. David noticed it too. We became closer, our relationship deepening as I opened myself fully to the life we were building. For once, I was free to love without reservation, to live without the shadow of my family's expectations haunting me. One evening, I took out my mother's letter, reading her words again, softer this time, like a quiet echo. I realized that I could forgive them, not because they'd asked for it, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. I could let go, finally, of the hurt, the anger, and the longing for something they could never give. In the years that followed, I built a life that was fully mine. I married David, surrounded by friends who had become like family, people who loved me for who I was, without conditions. We moved to a new home, started new traditions, created a world that felt safe, grounded in love and trust. And sometimes on quiet nights, I'd think back to my family, to the life I'd left behind. I'd remember the lessons I'd learned, the strength I'd found in standing on my own. The past would always be a part of me, a scar that had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I had found a new family, a family I had chosen, one built on mutual respect and love. And in that, I found a happiness that I knew my parents would have wanted for me, even if they hadn't been able to give it themselves. I was finally free,